Okay, you don't do any stress testing for these asymptomatic patients to diagnose CAD. Now, some of these asymptomatic patients will come to the cardiologist or physician for new onset of, say, chest pain or new symptoms which are like ischemia equivalent. Now, some of them would be acute and they would be diagnosed as acute coronary syndrome, and their triage is through the ECG and biomarkers and to the intervention. However, many of them are having very stable symptoms. They do not have enzyme rise. They are or they present as low risk unstable angina. Now, both the patients in the stable group or in the ACS group after treatment go into a very asymptomatic phase, but now they are known coronary artery disease patients. However, this asymptomatic pool keep on changing with the symptoms intermittently. So, what is the role of stress echocardiography? Stress echocardiography has a role for this group of patients, that is, those with coming with new symptoms or those have to be evaluated for their stable angina. Now, asymptomatic patients, actually, you really don't need the stress echocardiography. Now, why do you need stress echo for this group of patients? That is first to validate that these symptoms are really angina, then the diagnosis, then the prognosis, and whether we can have an insight about revascularization will improve the symptoms or even survival in this group of patients. Now, what are the indications of stress echocardiography? Now, these indications become stronger over the stress ECG, especially in the patients with intermediate or high pretest probability, or patients with ECG which is uninterpretable at rest, like say left bundle branch lock, LVH with strain pattern, or patients who cannot exercise on treadmill, so you are using pharmacological stress echo, or patients who have got a resting regional wall motion abnormalities. Then women give a lot of false positive stress ECGs, and it is better to start with a stress echocardiography, so that otherwise there is too much of downstream investigations and anxiety because of a false positive stress ECG. And patients who have got an established coronary artery disease and who are having a new onset of symptoms, stress echo is important to validate the symptoms. Also, those who have got the angiograms to know the significance of stenosis. Then those who have symptoms and who have established coronary artery disease to know the culprit lesion and to know the completeness of revascularization or even the viability in question. Now, interestingly, stress echo is always coupled with echocardiography. So the advantage over nuclear is that you can have unsuspected causes of chest pain which are diagnosed very easily, like pericarditis, aortic dissection, pulmonary embolism, hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, or valvular heart disease. So this is an additional bonus of doing a stress imaging, especially the stress echocardiography. Now these are the 44 studies meta-analysis of sensitivity and specificity of exercise echo, exercise spec, dovitamin stress echo, and pharmacological spec. If you see the spec or the nuclear studies have consistently a little higher sensitivity, but at a lower specificity, while stress echocardiography has consistently higher specificity with a little low sensitivity than the nuclear test. So the thing is, stress echo is good to rule in the disease, because when you get a regional wall motionality, you know that there is a significant ischemia. The more important is that a negative stress echo is very, very reassuring, because if you see the annual event rates for death and MI, or for unstable angina or revascularization, for a negative stress echocardiography is as low as 0.5% or 0.9%. So having a negative stress echocardiography is very, very reassuring. And the prognostic utility is same for both men and women. Now we'll go back to the basics of ischemic cascade, as we know that as we start exercising and if there is a flow limiting epicardial vessel disease, then first you get a perfusion heterogeneity which is picked up by the nuclear scan. Then there are metabolic alterations, then there is a diastolic dysfunction, and as the ischemia progresses you get a regional wall motion abnormality, and then you get ECG changes and chest pain. Obviously, this may not happen exactly in the same order, but this is how it happens in an experimental setting when you produce progressive coronary obstruction. However, remember the important thing is that the regional dyssynergy occurs quite late in the ischemic cascade. So that is why you have to exercise the patient to a very high level to provoke regional wall motion abnormality. So all your stress tests should be reaching maximal exertion to improve the sensitivity of your stress echocardiography. Then the modalities of stress echo, all of you know, for exercise, we use treadmill or supine or upright bicycle. For pharmacological agents, you use dobutamine. Adenosine stress echo is rarely used except for the transthoracic LAD FFR. And also one can do a pacing stress echo, especially if the patient is already having a pacemaker. You can just call the pacemaker guy and just raise the heart rate, and for every increment in the heart rate, you look for the regional wall motion abnormalities. Now this should be the layout of your stress echo. Your examination couch should have a cutout like this, so that when the patient lies on his left lateral position, you can go all the way to the axilla and can get good long axis images. So this cutout is very important. Then your treadmill should be in the proximity, and there should be an easy egress from the treadmill, so that can immediately come and lie down here. He should come and immediately lie down within 5 seconds. Okay, and you should be standing on this side all ready with all your jelly or smeared on your probe, everything. And your ECG cable from your ECG also should be of such a length that it goes all the way to the treadmill, and you should have all the resuscitation equipment at hand. If you are doing dobutamine, just pull the ECG console closer to the bed. This is the cutout here, and put your dobutamine infusion syringe here, so that the patient can keep his left arm on this, resting on this, and you can start the dobutamine infusion here. Now all of you are echocardiographers, so you know the typical distribution of the coronary territories. 4 chamber is the one where all the 3 coronary territories are represented, because this is the inferior part of the septum. So this supply comes from the PDA perforators, while the apex is generally by the left ventral descending artery, and the lateral wall is by the circumflex. 2 chamber gives you the LAD and the PDA distribution, and the apical long axis view gives you the LAD distribution. And this posterior wall, also called as inferolateral wall, is a watershed area. Either it will be supplied by the PLV coming from the RCA, or by the distal obtuse marginals, and in the short axis. So all these 6 images have to be captured by stress echocardiography. So generally all the 3 long axis images has to be captured, and you can capture either basal and apical short axis images to get all the coronary territories. Now there are certain tips and tricks to improve the sensitivity of stress echo, and these tips and tricks are not only for the stress echo, but they are also very important to pick up the regional wall motion abnormality in any echo, in any resting echo. So that is why just to focus on these tips and tricks. And these are not only for the regional wall motions abnormality on the echocardiography, but also for, say, if you're reading, say, a cine MRI, there also you can use the same tips and tricks for the regional wall motion assessment. First of all, look at one segment at a time. I always keep on telling this multiple times to all the fellows that never look at the LV in toto. Look at one segment at a time. You know, in long axis, there are 6 segments, 2 basal, 2 middle, and 2 apical. Look at one segment at a time, and your appreciation of regional wall motion abnormality suddenly improves. Okay. Second thing is that to look at the regional wall motion abnormality and to appreciate, you can keep one stationary object there, like my cursor here, or you can use measurement cursor. Just keep it there and look at how the endocardium is coming towards that cursor. Now this helps you to appreciate the movement of the subendocardium also, and how well it is coming towards the stationary object. So use a stationary object and keep that stationary object at every segment. Okay, so you also come to note that this middle segment, the endocardial delineation is very poor. So probably your appreciation of regional wall motion abnormality will be not good. So if there are 2 consecutive segments where the endocardium is not well appreciated, do not talk about regional wall motion abnormality there. You will make a big mistake. So looking at one segment and putting a stationary object there. As I told you, this you can use it even for your regular regional wall motion assessments, not only for stress echo. Then when you put a stationary object there, look at the endocardium. Do not look at the epicardium first. Look at the endocardium and look how the endocardium is coming towards the center of the image. Okay, center of the image, or the center line of the image if you are in a long axis view. Second thing is, not only that you would be looking at the endocardium coming towards you and the velocity of that endocardium, but also now start looking at the epicardium. Now, why I will tell you. So when you are looking at a particular segment, one segment at a time, putting a cursor there, you are looking at the endocardium, looking at the motion of the endocardium, velocity of the endocardium, start looking at the epicardium. Now, once you start looking at the epicardium, you will appreciate that entire segment thickening. So most important thing is, don't look at just the wall motion, but look at systolic thickening. That is very important. And this becomes very, very easy when you have got a contrast in the LV cavity. So if I'm keeping my cursor here, now start looking at this particular segment here, look at the endocardium, look at the velocity of motion. Now start looking at the epicardium and start appreciating systolic thickening. And that way you go for each and every segment. And the segment where the endocardium and epicardium is not visualized, do not talk about the regional wall motion abnormality. Why this is important? Because even if the particular segment is not contracting, it can still get pulled and pushed by the other healthy segments. So that is why thickening is more important, because thickening is life. It tells you that muscle is contracting. So this is for the short segments. Again, the same thing in the short segment also, appreciate the thickening by looking at one segment and then looking at the endocardium and then looking at the epicardium. You will always appreciate that the endocardium moves faster than the epicardium, and that is why you get a thickening. Okay, so both these things you appreciate very well. Then why use contrast? It is so simple. If I kept a non-contrast image here and a contrast image here, the appreciation of the endocardium and epicardium becomes very easy. This is not only for the stress echo, but even for our regular echocardiography. So in the regular echocardiography, if two consecutive segments are not visualized well, like here the basal and mid anterior, the lateral wall, I'm not seeing the endocardium so well. So this is where I have to use the contrast, and I can then delineate the endocardium well. Look at the endocardium, look at the epicardium, and appreciate the thickening, correct? So the endo and epi should both be seen together. Okay, and that is why the use of contrast, and you will not make mistakes. Now remember, we are very, very lazy in using contrast. Now remember, for the cardiac MRI, it is very easy because the cine MRI gives them the blood contrast without giving any contrast. Okay, the blood just gives the contrast, so they get beautiful delineation of the endocardium, and the epicardium is also seen very well because of the MR spatial resolution. So appreciating the systolic thickening is very easy in any echo, in any kind of an echo window in the MRI. So if you want to compete with MRI, start using contrast and start creating this kind of images. Then second thing I always tell is that if you are doing a stress echo at peak stress, just stop the image and just look at the peak end systole. Okay, so this is the diastole, and I'm coming to the peak end systole. Now remember, when you are at peak end systole, the LV cavity is thin and triangular. Okay, it is thin and triangular. The apex will always be pointed and thin and triangular. Okay, so the moment you don't get a triangular apex, you start seeing a rounded apex, or you start seeing some bumps on this end systolic frame, you know that there is an abnormality there. So remember that, look at the shape of end systole. So if your end systolic shape is not a triangular, a triangle with a small base, then there is a regional wall motion abnormality. Okay, if you get bumps on those triangles, that is a problem there. Then start looking at the coronary distribution. Okay, so you go by coronary distribution. So here we know is the PDA territory, this is the LAD territory, and this is the circumflex obtuse marginal territory. For the two chamber here, this is your PDA territory, again the LAD territory, again the anterior wall, the diagonals of the anterior wall. Then in the short axis, the same way, you will look at this inferior wall and the inferior septum, which is the RCA territory and the posterior wall, lateral wall can be circumflex territory, anterior wall is your diagonal territory, anterior septum your LAD territory. But what is important is that the ischemia will be first provoked at the distal most perfusion territory of a particular artery. So for the LAD, start looking at the distal most perfusion, that means the apical septum and apical inferior wall for the earliest regional wall motion abnormality. While for an inferior for the right coronary artery, generally start looking at the mid posterior wall or mid inferior wall, because that is the distal most territory of RCA perfusion. And for the lateral wall or for the circumflex, we ask them to look at the mid anterolateral wall for the distal most LAD territory. Secondly, for improving the appreciation of regional wall motion abnormality, watch the first half of systole. And this is very interesting. I'll show you one full systole. Now, a very expert cardiographer will know that this apical septum looks hypokinetic or tardokinetic. Okay. Now, let me do one trick. Now, this is the complete cycle. Now, if I take this right cursor all the way up to the peak of the T wave, or on the upslope of the T wave, I will get the first 2/3 of systole. And what happens? Look at it. Now there is a very large area of akinesia. Okay, and you can reduce the this motion to 30% or 40% to appreciate it much better. But look at the lateral wall; it has already taken off. So in the first half of the systole, all the healthy segments take off, while the tardokinetic segments do not take off and they stand out. So use half systole. Now, many people take this too close to R, that you should not do. What generally we're trying to do is that we take it to the peak T wave and on the upslope of the T wave. We don't even enter onto the ST segment. And many of the regional wall motion abnormalities you will pick up. Because remember, if you go very early, you may have tardokinetic segment which may be related to the cardiomyopathic process, may not be ischemia related. So remember, this is another great way of looking at the regional wall motion abnormality, and all the healthy segments take off in the first half of the systole. So here you will be looking at the takeoff of the circumflex, takeoff of the endocardium from the circumflex segment in this particular view. I have kept the full systole here, half systole here, and you can really appreciate now a very large territory of akinesia. Then another interesting thing about tethering motion and translational motion. Now both of these motions occur both in the echo also and in cine MRI also. Now why this happens, and let me tell you. Left ventricle is like a bullet. Okay, if I am imaging the left ventricle in long axis view like this, or if I am looking at the LV in short axis view like this, the LV is tapering on either side. Even in my short axis view or even in my long axis view, it is tapering on either side. So remember, if my imaging plane just moves up and down, that the imaging plane will not move because you are steady there, but the LV may move through this plane. So if you have got a through plane motion across your long axis or a through plane motion across your short axis, because the LV is tapering, you will falsely feel that the endocardium is coming closer to you, and you will feel that there is a motion. So what endocardium I am seeing here and what endocardium is coming closer to me may not be from the same slice. It may be lower down also. So it depends upon the through plane motion. And this through plane motion can happen because of respiration or because of the cardiac motion also. And this is called as translational motion. So this can happen because of the cardiac movement of twisting, also because of the respiratory motion. While tethering motion is something different. Tethering is something like this, that you may have a lateral wall infarct, but a very hyperdynamic anterior wall or a very hyperdynamic inferior wall may just pull that wall up and down, up and down. And that is why you may find a motion there. And that is called tethering motion. So translational motion, tethering motion. So how do you differentiate that? Again, how to overcome that? First, look for thickening. If you have got a passive tethering motion, or if you have got a passive translational motion and the endocardium is coming closer, but there is no thickening, you know that this is just a translational and tethering motion and not a true motion. So look for thickening, and that is why you have to appreciate the endocardium and epicardium and the thickening. And watch for the first half of systole, because a true cardiac contraction starts in the first half of systole, while Most of these translational motions and tethering motions occur in the latter part of systole. So when you are in doubt, look at the first half of the systole. The translational motions and the tethering motions are removed. And again, look for the anatomical landmarks. So if you have got a particular a papillary muscle or a particular, say, a trabecula seen in a particular view, if that is absent in the peak systole, you know that you have moved away from that imaging plane. So that means this is that there is a through plane motion. So you know that the diastolic and systolic frames are not the same image plane. So these three things you use for looking for translational and tethering motion. So remember, regional wall motion abnormality assessment is the basic thing expected of an echocardiographer or for the MRI reader, but that is the most important thing, and that is the most basic thing, and this is the most difficult thing to master, and it takes years to master it well. So just remember all these steps and you will never miss any regional wall motion abnormality. Then how to look at the wall motion score index. Now, 1 is that normal or hyperkinetic wall, 2 is hypokinetic, 3 is akinetic or absent or negligible thickening, and 4 is dyskinetic or systolic thinning or stretching. So what you do is for every segment, now here you are using 16 segments, because what happens is LV apical cap, which is a 17 segment, is not seen in routine echo. It is seen only on, say, nuclear perfusion or on MRI or in echo when you use the LV contrast, opacification contrast. Otherwise, the 17 segment is not seen. So that is why this is for 16 segments. Now each segment you give this particular number. Whether it is hypokinetic, it will get 2. If it is akinetic, you will get 3. And what you do is that you get the sum of all the segments at peak exercise and divide them by 16. Now, if all your segments become hyperkinetic, you will get a wall motion score index of 1, which is normal. Anything more than 1 is abnormal. Okay, so if you get 1.2, 1.4, 1.7, and worse it becomes, worse is the regional wall motion abnormality at peak exercise. Now we'll start with the cases. Now let us look at this 39-year-old male who had a monomorphic VT and no acute coronary syndrome. So we are doing is a stress echo. So look at the peak exercise. The first thing, for the left panel will be rest, and the peak panel is the peak exercise after the peak treadmill. So always, first thing that you should always look at as the whether there is a LV dilatation or not. There is no LV dilatation. Then just look at the end systolic frame. Is it becoming nice, triangular, a small triangle with a narrow base? Yes, that it is thickening. So this is coming to good. And then look at one segment at a time. Appreciate the systolic thickening. So this is 4 chamber, this is long axis, and this is again 4 chamber, and this is 2 chamber views. And look there nicely, the LV cavity is collapsing at peak exercise. There's nice triangular LV cavity, and there is no regional wall motion abnormality. So we don't have any polling here, but definitely there is no regional wall motion abnormality. And let us look at his angio. This is absolutely clean LAD here and absolutely clean right coronary artery here. So the next thing is that he had a monomorphic VT. So he went ahead with a CMR and did not have any infiltration. And we realized it was just a holiday heart syndrome because of excess alcohol. And let us look at his wall motion score. Everything gets 1 because it is hyperdynamic in 4 chamber. Everything gets 1 in 2 chamber views. Why this is 2 chamber? Because I can see bicommissures here. And then this is the long axis view, and anterior septum, posterior wall, I am getting 16. So 16, 16 divided by 16, wall motion score index 1. Now this is the end diastolic volume, and this is end systolic volume at rest. And so also you will use the end diastolic volumes and end systolic volume at peak, and you will use the Simpson's method here, and with the contrast it is very easy to planimeter it, and you will get the rest end diastolic volume and peak stress. Always the end systolic volume should drop at peak exercise, and the EF should increase by 5% at least. Let us look at this 32-year-old gentleman. He's a impaired glucose tolerance. He's a non-smoker. He has atypical chest pain. So if he's just diabetic, so that's why he puts in a higher risk. But he's just a 32-year-old, and the chest pain is not classical, so you will call it atypical. So he becomes an intermediate pretest probability. Now this guy, suppose had a classical angina of effort and a diabetic, you really don't need a stress echo. He should directly go for an optimal medical therapy. If it fails, should go for an angio. Now, since he has got an atypical chest pain, it becomes intermediate pretest probability. So you should do a stress imaging. Now we'll look at this echo. Again, the left panel is at rest, and this is the panel at peak exercise. First thing, look, the LV seems dilated at peak exercise. The right panel is increased. And then we'll look at one segment at a time. Posterior wall is, this is a long axis view. Posterior wall is contracting very well. But from apex to septum, if I put my cursor here, there is no endocardial motion and there is no systolic thickening in this view, while there is a nice systolic thickening in the posterior wall. So we'll go for a two-chamber view. Again, this is long axis and this is two-chamber view. This is anterior wall. First thing is that the LV is dilated. You can look at the anterior wall. There is no endocardial excursion, no systolic thickening. Look at the inferior wall, which is moving well. So we know that this treadmill stress echo shows LAD regional wall motion abnormality. So we'll look at his angio, and there is a very classic LAD stenosis there. And so this is a true positive stress echo. Now, how will you refine the outcome? That's how do you know the prognosis of a positive stress echo? Because now with the ischemia trial, we know that you don't have to go send every patient for a coronary angio and revascularization. So you look for his response to optimal medical therapy, and you should also should look at certain image indicators of severe ischemia, though the ischemia trial said that that also is not required. But the things that can tell you that he is a high risk is wall motion score index, because it tells you the extent of ischemia and severity also, because the akinetic gets higher degree and the extent because you are adding the wall motions. So that is why it gives extent and severity. Then if you have got a resting regional wall, on top of that you get a new exercise induced, that is also high risk. And if your end systolic volume dilates, that is again a sign of a significant poor prognostic outcome. So we'll put his wall motion score index. So you get 3.3 for his apex for his 4-chamber view, and for his 2-chamber view we are giving 3.3 for his anterior wall and the apical inferior wall, and for his long axis view we are giving 3.3 for the mid and apical and the apical, and we get a wall motion score 29, and divided by 16 it is 1.8. Anything above 1.7 is significant. Let us look at this case. A 49-year-old marathon runner, non-diabetic, non-hypertensive. He had one episode of uneasiness during practice. Now the thing is this, these are very high profile runners. So we said, well, let us go for a CT coronary, because once and all we should know everything. Because his troponin had a slight rise. But remember, these people who are doing extraordinary levels of exercise immediately post that, if you collect the troponins, it can be falsely high. So but the problem was that his CT calcium score was 1000. So we didn't go ahead with a CT coronary angio, because this is something very high where your CT coronary may not show a good lumen. So we went ahead with the stress echo, and this is his resting ECG. And you would say, why not just a rest stress ECG? Because these people have an extraordinary exercise capacity. Stress ECG will be not sensitive, plus these people are a lot of ECG changes because of training itself. So you can get false positive stress ECG. So we went with stress echo. So let us look again. The left panel is peak rest exercise, and this is the peak exercise. We look at one segment at a time, and we realize this inferior septum is not contracting here. This is the anterior wall which is contracting well, and this inferior wall is not contracting because this is 2-chamber. Inferior wall is not contracting there. And then we go ahead with the long axis view. The septum is contracting very well. The posterior wall, the mid posterior wall is actually having more of a tethering motion, no systolic thickening. So that means this patient is definitely having what? The RCA territory, regional wall motion abnormality. And this is his angio. You can see a very, very tight right coronary disease. So remember, just doing an extensive level of exercise doesn't give a good amount of coronary protection, because this is a multifactorial disease. And this is his left coronary, lot of calcium there, you can see even before the contrast comes in, but no tight lesion. Let us take another case. A 35-year-old gentleman with chest pain which was there 7 days back. That time he didn't come to the hospital. He's non-hypertensive, non-diabetic. The ECG is normal, but the troponins are raised. Okay, so he becomes like an unstable. He's like a non-ST elevation MI. So this is his rest images, and this is his peak exercise images. Now look at the peak exercise image. If you see the septum, one segment at a time, septum is doing fine. Basal lateral wall is okay, but you look at the mid and apical lateral wall. There is no systolic thickening and absolute akinesia. Now this is a long axis view again. This is the posterior wall or inferolateral wall. Look at the septum thickening very well, one segment at a time. And here you can see that the posterior wall has absolutely become thinned and akinetic. We'll look at the two-chamber view. In the two-chamber view, again, the anterior wall is contracting well. This is the peak exercise. Now, again, look at here, the inferior wall is actually contracting well. But the anterior wall, the mid and apical anterior wall is not contracting well. Now, remember, we got an abnormality in the lateral and posterior wall, which was a circumflex territory, while the anterior wall should be a LAD territory. But remember, this is in contiguous with the circumflex territory. So this could be just a tethering motion also, that the LAD, that is the circumflex territory, which is not contracting, may be holding back on the anterior wall. That can also be there. So we got a motion abnormality in the anterior wall, lateral wall, and the posterior wall. Okay. So also you can see in short axis view here, look at the thickening of the septum and no thickening at the posterolateral wall. So we'll look at, so this looks to be a circumflex territory, and probably there was some tethering with the anterior wall. So let us look at the angio. And look at this, the circumflex is completely cut off. Actually, it is completely thrombosed. And so how is it? Actually, this right coronary artery is giving the entire collaterals to the circumflex territory. So that is why it has not infarcted. And but when you started exercise, it got the exercise. And let us look at the LAD. And now this gives you the idea why the anterior wall was becoming akinetic. You can see there is a tight ostial diagonal here, and that was producing the anterior wall motion. So it was not just a tethering motion. But let me tell you, generally the stress echo will diagnose a coronary artery disease by one artery less. That means when you say one coronary artery disease, many times you have got two coronary artery disease. When you find in two coronary artery disease, many times on angio you get three coronary artery disease. Why this happens is, you generally stop the exercise when the most severe ischemia makes you stop the exercise, and you get all particular mesmerized by the regional wall motion abnormality of a most severe form of the disease. So you miss the other territories. So you look at the wall motion score index here. This is the peak exercise. Entire lateral wall got 3 in two chamber. We got 2 for the anterior wall. And for the long axis view, we get 3 at the posterior wall. So wall motion score index was 28, so 1.75. So what is the importance of this wall motion score index? So if on x-axis is the wall motion score index and y-axis is the cardiac events per person year, then actually the graph just climbs. So as your wall motion score index goes on increasing, your yearly cardiac events goes on increasing. Not only that, if you have, if you want to see the benefit of revascularization, then the patients who have got, say, just a wall motion score index of 1 versus 1.1 to 1.7 versus 1.7 to more than 1.7, the cardiac event rates go on increasing. So it is good that those who are having a wall motion score index above 1.7, their cardiac event rates go above 0.5, 0.5. So this can happen an effective gatekeeper to go for coronary angio. But interestingly, the ischemia trial actually recruited this particular group. Then if you look at the effect of revascularization, now this is a retrospective study. It is not like a prospective study like the ischemia trial. Now here, if you see that the revascularization shown by the yellow graphs and the medical management by the red graphs. So what the authors have shown here in the retrospective studies, that those with a wall motion score index above 1.7, actually there was a greater reduction in the cardiac events after revascularization, and there was not much change between 1 to 1.7. Of course, this is a retrospective study, and now we know from ischemia trial where the wall motion score index was above 1.7 that even those patients also did very well on optimal medical therapy. So what did the ischemia trial do? Now the ischemia trial was the first trial where the patients were recruited after a stress ECG or a stress echo or a stress CMR or a stress nuclear study where the ischemia was documented, and then they were enrolled. All these trials before that, like Courage trial or Bari trial or Bari 2D trial, enrolled the patients for optimal medical therapy versus revascularization after knowing their coronary angiogram, okay, catheter coronary angiogram. While ischemia was the first trial which enrolled the patients when they were positive on the stress ECG, stress echo, or stress CMR, or stress nuclear. Now, and then they have a blinded coronary CT, and then they put them into optimal medical therapy versus the surgical or the revascularization by PCI or CABG. But remember, the CT reports were not known to the sites where they were randomized. Why the CT reports were not known? Because they just wanted to rule out the left, means all the false positives. Now, problem was that all those who entered that trial were entered through various tests like stress ECG, stress echo, stress CMR, stress nuclear. Then how do you know the equivalence of ischemia? So they did a very interesting thing, very intelligent thing. What they said, that they looked at the threshold of each of those tests, the threshold above which the cardiac death or MI was 5% per year or above. So what was the equivalent threshold across the test was? For nuclear test, it was more than 10% of ischemic myocardium. For stress echo, it was more than 3 segments out of 16 segments. And for the stress CMR, if it was a dobutamine stress CMR, then it was again the 3 segments out of 16. And if it was a stress perfusion CMR, then it was 4 segments out of 32 perfusion defects. So these were the equivalent ischemia on these various tests which look at the ischemia via various different ways. But this is the ischemic threshold above which they got enrolled into ischemia trial. Now let us look at another case. 63-year-old gentleman. He is having more of a significant dyspnea, class 3, and also exercise-induced giddiness and fatigue for last 6 months. Now he had a CABG done 12 years back. So now, obviously, with the new onset of symptoms in a patient who has got a 12-year-old CABG grafts, that too some venous graft, obviously the cardiologist asked him to go for a graft coronary angio, catheter angio. Now the catheter angio showed a patent Lima to LAD and a patent SVJ to RCA. These were the only 2 grafts which were put 12 years back. So interestingly, despite having a very nice patent grafts, this was not expected. So the thing is, since the only piece of puzzle was lacking was that no one has validated his symptoms. So looking at the graft angio, he was assured that there's nothing cardiac about it. So you will have to see probably a pulmonologist. Now he's an ex-smoker, so obviously that was another thing to look, but the PFT was normal. Pulmonologist said there is nothing wrong there. So before, and then the thing is, there was no history of hypertension and diabetes. So the thing is, we said, let us go back to our humble stress echo before sending this patient to psychiatrist. So let us do his simple stress echo. So this is his resting ECG here, Q waves in 2-3 wave. This is his peak exercise stress ECG. There is some ST elevation in inferior leads, but these are Q leads. So you can have a dyskinetic inferior wall can produce ST elevation there. But look at this ST depression in one AVL and except one AVL actually. V5, V6 there is ST elevation, but that is again a Q lead. So that is not significant. So the stress ECG is not very conclusive. But let us look at a stress echo. And to all our dismay, all of you will now first look at the volumes. Now there is a great increase in the LV volume at peak exercise. The right hand panels of peak exercise, left hand panels are rest. And inferior wall is akinetic because he had an inferior wall infarct there. And you can see that there is actually ballooning. The entire LAD territory is ballooned here, and also the under wall is ballooned here. Now this gentleman has got a perfectly normal Lima to LAD. And so also in the long axis views, you can see that there's a apical ballooning almost here. I told you that peak exercise, you should have a very narrow and triangle as end systolic frame, and here there's a perfect dilatation. So that means this looks like a TVD. So how can that be? So we looked at the angio again, and actually we repeated the angio. Actually, this is native vessel. You can see actually a nice competitive flow in the Lima there. And this is his, the nice competitive flow in the LAD territory. And this is the venous graft going to the right coronary artery, flowing perfectly normal. And this is the internal mammary that is also actually filling up the LAD so well. Now, one would say that, okay, there is one intercostal vessel which is causing some kind of a steal from the Lima, but that should not have this the same thing. But suddenly we realized that the Lima catheter was showing a very, very low pressure. and you come down here and take a shoot in the subclavian artery, and there is a very tight 90% stenosis in the left subclavian artery. So that means the Lima territory ischemia was related to the subclavian artery disease. So we just put a stent in the left subclavian artery and just coiled that intercostal vessel, and he was absolutely symptom free. So we look at his wall motion score index here on these cartoons, and it is 38/16, it is 2.3. Look at his rest volumes, look at his peak volumes, and you can see actually his end diastolic volume is increasing from 130 to 146, end systolic volume is increasing from 70 to 97, and the EF is falling by 5%. So he was actually very, very high risk. So stress echo not only told us that his dyspnea is cardiac, but it told us it is ischemic, and we have to see some other cause. Now you would say, what is the importance of this end systolic volume dilatation? Now this is a study of people about 65 years. Now what they found that those patients on stress echo, if the end systolic volume decrease, this is their event-free survival. Now if there was no change in end systolic volume, actually their event-free survival was lower, and if they had a increase in the end systolic volume, the event-free survival had decreased further. So that means just not the end systolic volume not reducing itself also puts you at a higher risk. Then there is another study where they looked at the patients who had a very good exercise capacity, and they looked whether the end systolic volume decreased or there was no change or it increased. And what they found that the cardiac death shown by the red bars, the non-fatal MI shown by the yellow bars, and the late revascularization shown by the green bars, all of them are high. If on the stress echo, the end systolic volume does not reduce or it increases, actually all these event rates increase over the time, even in the people with good exercise capacity. Now let us look at a case, a last case, 58-year-old male. He has an atypical chest pain on exertion. He's a diabetic for 23 years. He's actually on insulin for 23 years. Now again, he becomes an intermediate stress, intermediate pretest probability. He's non-hypertensive, non-smoker. So let us look at his stress echo. Again, look at the panels on the right. First thing you can notice is that there's a cardiac dilatation, and you can see that this is the apex which has ballooned. This LAD territory is ballooned, and we look at this two chamber here, entire apex is ballooned, anterior wall is ballooned. Okay, so I think all of you would agree with me that this is a LAD territory, regional wall motion abnormality. Obviously, he's a diabetic and on insulin. So what more you want? So we go ahead with his angio. And his angio is absolutely clean, absolutely clear. There is nothing there in the coronary angio, and there are not even plaques that can produce some spasm. There is nothing there in the entire LAD territory, and nothing there in his right coronary territory. Now, obviously, we have not done the acetylcholine challenge here, but this was a too large territory to develop an akinesia. So this is we will call as false positive stress echocardiography. Now, we are calling this stress echocardiography as false positive only because the epicardial vessels are clean. But remember, beyond the epicardial vessel, there are too many things. There is a huge amount of microvasculature, and beyond the microvasculature, there are the muscles. You can have any problem with the microvasculature, the microvasculature flow reserve may be low in diabetics, or you may have subclinical cardiomyopathy also, and all of them can get unmasked when you do a stress echocardiography. So this is called as false positive stress echocardiography. And this particular paper from Mayo, what they did, they looked at the true positive stress echoes and they looked at false positive stress echoes. So the people who have stress echo positives, they looked at the angios, where the angiogram, the CAD was less than 50% stenosis, or normal angios, they call them false positives, and true positive if that was more than 50%. And they looked at the cumulative survival over the following years. So this is for the DSE and this is for the exercise. So the true positive have a progressively reducing cumulative survival over next 5 years. But interesting, the false positives also followed up the same. That means the false positive are not at all a benign group. They also have a similar incidence of the event-free survival over the next 5 years. So why this happens? This happens because of the entire microvasculature, and that microvasculature is something which is still a big mystery. And the false positives could be related to subclinical cardiomyopathy, myocardial dysfunction because of diabetes itself, presence of endothelial dysfunction, or even a stress-induced Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. And this generally you will encounter in dopamine stress echoes. You may get just an apical ballooning on peak dopamine and normal coronaries, and this can be Takotsubo variants. So friends, what else you would look at the stress echo? Because you are doing an echo, there are so many other things that you can see there. Look at the RV dilatation and function. Many times on the patients who are being done stress echo, we have found that there is an acute RV dilatation, and those we straight away send them for CT pulmonary angio, and we find occult pulmonary embolisms there. Then you look for a new onset MR. That is a very interesting thing. This can happen not only for myxomatous mitral valve disease, but also because of trivial triple vessel disease. And these patients will present with, say a flash pulmonary edema or a significant dyspnea on exertion. You can just, when you get your patients breathing down, you can just look at the E by E prime. So if the E by E prime goes above 15, that tells you that the LV filling pressure has increased, and you can pick up the HEPPEF patient there. Then look at the TR velocity. Now, only in 50% of the patients you can achieve TR velocity at peak exercise. E by E prime, you can get up to 80% of patients at peak exercise. And here you have to little allow the heart rate to come down, but the E by E prime doesn't rapidly change like regional wall motion abnormalities. TR velocity 50% of the time you can get. If the TR velocity goes above, say gradient, say about something like 2.8 or 3 meters, you know that there's an exercise induced pH. And lastly, don't forget the lungs. You can just have your ultrasound of the lungs and you can have wonders, and I'll show you something. Now this is one patient, and you can see that this is rest, and there is a very innocuous looking MR there, and this is peak exercise, and you can see there is a huge amount of MR there. It is almost filling up the left atrial cavity going all the way to the pulmonary veins. So this lady actually on angio, if you can see, the LV is actually normal. She was terribly dyspneic on exercise, and you can see that the MR has jumped, and she had a severe triple vessel disease, and especially the circumflex was critical, and that's why she was developing this papillary muscle dysfunction. And then this particular patient, very interesting. These are the lungs at exercise, and this is post-exercise. What is the difference? So when the lungs are healthy, you will get horizontal lines, okay, because the pleura doesn't allow the ultrasound beam to go further. So you will just get a reverberation of the pleura and you get horizontal lines. The moment you develop interstitial edema, you start developing vertical lines. And these vertical lines are called as comets. Now the same patient, just after the exercise, starts showing you the comets, and you know that the cause of dyspnea is definitely interstitial pulmonary edema on exercise. Use this for your valvular heart disease patients, and also use this for your HEPPEF patients. Very simple. At the end of that, this won't vanish immediately. So after you are seeing the regional wall, after you are seeing the E by E prime, after you are seeing the TR velocity, just put your probe in both the lower axillas and look for these comets. If you have these comets, you are done. You know that this dyspnea is related to rise in LVDP. Okay, and this is our guidelines, the Indian Academy of Echocardiography guidelines, which we published in the Journal of Indian Academy of Echocardiography in 2017. And actually we were 3 years ahead of the West, because as you know that in 2020, American Society of Echocardiography has come out with the guidelines. Those are also quite extensive and very good. Our guidelines were more focused and more indigenous, because we know what our people can do with the limited resources. So we have not included the contrast perfusion in the myocardium, which is there in the American Society guidelines. But these are very practical. Anyone who wants to start the Echo Lab, they have got a complete detailed instruction. That's why we said not only guidelines, but a manual there. A lot of efforts we have put, and there are a lot of videos for this particular guidelines. And the happy reading. So I think all of you should start the stress echo. And once you start doing stress echoes, you will remember that even in your day-to-day life, your regional wall motion abnormality appreciation will improve a lot. Thank you.
Wonderful, Dr. Nitin. This has been a wonderful disposition, and I would request everybody to read the guidelines, and it will help us also. One way that we would have some TRP for our journal. I mean, I'm calling it TRP because we are looking for people. It's free. You can go and download that PDF. I have that PDF. I deliberately didn't share. I thought you guys should go and click on the site, and he's done a wonderful job there, because all the things which he taught you today would make sense once you read that article. Dr. Nitin, I remember on last Saturday, Dr. Y.C. Chandra showed a similar case of, did you attend that?
Yeah, I attended that. That was a mind-boggling case. Yeah.
Yeah, mind-boggling. You know, they had, the patient had the similar kind of regional wall motion abnormality, LV dilatation, went into pulmonary edema, did a coronary angiogram, normal, and then finally it turned out to be amyloid. Young patient, 42.
Correct, correct. So
So
that
I
was a
think
microvascular dysfunction, microvascular dysfunction of
dysfunction because
amyloid,
of
and they proved
because of
it by
amyloid.
biopsy. They showed that
Yeah,
the amyloid was there in
yeah,
those microvasculature in the arterioles. I think that was a great case. I mean, probably we should start looking for amyloid in this kind of cases also.
absolutely, absolutely. Most of these false positive cases, so-called, I mean, we would find something because the regional wall is quite sure. I mean, it's there. It is a hard endpoint. I don't think so. We can. So let's take the questions from the audience. What is the maximum dose of dobutamine you wish others to use?
Okay, so generally I'll tell you what happens is when you start with 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, you don't have to go above 40 because by 40 you already achieved the peak inotropy. Now, what happens many times is that up to 20, you don't have much heart rate increment because as you know, the dobutamine is not a very good chronotropic agent. And then somewhere at 30, 40, sometimes you suddenly get a tachycardia, or after 40, you give atropine aliquots and suddenly you get a tachycardia. So what we have started doing is that from 20 onwards, we start giving very small aliquots of atropine. Okay, just half a 1/4 cc of atropine and flush it. And then from 20, 30, 40, you get a very gradual increase in the heart rate and you can achieve this. So main important thing is to reach the maximum dose of the vitamin and reach the maximum target heart rate, because as I showed you in the ischemic cascade, the regional wall comes late. So you have to have very high pressure product. So to improve the sensitivity, try to go to the highest vitamin dose or till the regional wall motion. If the regional wall motion develops on the vitamin, stop there. Don't go to 40. And if you're doing a viability testing, then you should not be going about 20 because about 20, the heart rate increases and everything then become ischemic.
I use a hand grip quite frequently. Have you found it useful?
Very useful. Actually, every patient we give a hand grip. Okay, we give him in a hand grip. What we do, those small little saline bottles, we give them in their hand so that they can keep on pressing it, and that increases their blood pressure also. And that we find that then you don't get paradoxical BP fall. Many times on 10, 20 dobutamine, there is because of the peripheral vasodilation or because of the stimulation of these type C receptors in RV, you suddenly get a hypo and brady also. But with this particular grip, you don't get that problem, and the heart rate also increases very well. And sometimes you are just close and you want to just push him ahead. You just ask him to continue to press on that bottle and he just goes above that. So hand grip, using small aliquots of atropine, these are the two things that you should start right from 20 mics.
About 5% or 2% increase is there if I make the patient talk, and that also gives a little bit increment because of the increased venous return, maybe. So now there is a question from Dr. Monica. Wall motion score index, should it be calculated only in apical views or we can do that on a short axis views also?
Generally, I think it is best to do it on all the 3 apical views. Better to calculate on that, because I'll tell you what happens is that they are the first set of images that you take, so you don't miss regional wall there. Short axis are already taken late, and as you know, within 45 seconds, the regional wall motion abnormality starts, going away. Okay, it just starts disappearing in many patients. So try to use those apical ones. And as you know that the ischemia starts from subendocardium. So the longitudinal function gets affected first. So the long axis images actually show the regional wall much better than the short axis images. Short axis images have to cross check most of the time.
Yeah. So, I mean, this question, there's the next question which is repeated in various formats. And the basic question is that we get a TMT positive stress or ECG showing an ST segment depression, and we have a normal stress echo. There's no regional wall motion normality. How do you deal with these patients, and what is their outcome?
Yeah, that's actually a very regular occurrence. It's a good question. See, so the thing is, it is always start with pre-test probability. None of the tests are perfect. Okay, as you know that the stress ECG has a sensitivity and specificity of 60 and 67%, and your stress echo and stress nuclear has got around 85%, and the stress CMR perfusion goes up to 89-90%. None of the test is 100% sensitive or specific. Always start with pretest probability. If pretest probability is high, chances of a true ischemia or the true positive test is high. So in a stress ECG, someone who is having a true angina, a typical angina, I will not even bother about the regional wall motion abnormality. If he has got ST depression and a typical angina, I would call it positive. Now, suppose there is a 45-year-old woman and she has got a deep ST depressions in the ECG, and her stress echo is showing hyperdynamic motion. I am perfect sure that this is a false positive stress ECG, and I will give her a label of negative. Okay, so always remember the pretest probability. Now, if the pretest probability is low, you get a lot of ST depression on ECG, but you get a hyperdynamic LV motion abnormality. I will call it negative. Pretest probability is very high. Like patient is a CKD, he has got a left ventricular hypertrophy, and he is hypertensive. He gets a lot of STT changes because of LVH. In that case, I will be very careful about giving a negative even if I see good regional wall motion abnormality. Then I will try to look at very subtle changes of regional wall motions there, like looking at the first half of systole, whether there is a reduction in the end systolic volume or not, so and so forth, and whether the patient had typical angina or not. Now remember, you can have a truly false positive stress ECG in this group of patients, especially elderly with CKD with LVH and severe hypertensive response to exercise. Here, if you don't get a regional wall motion abnormality, till you have to be very careful. Don't just label it as negative test. Okay, then I think it is better that you have to have a caution in this patient. You can go for a further testing in this particular group of patients: CKD, hypertensive, LVH, and elderly. Okay, anything?
There is a question regarding how do you achieve a maximum heart rate in patients those who are on a chronic beta blocker. But I think I would extend it further that, how do you tell them to stop beta blocker? Which patients you don't tell them to stop? And in case they are on beta blocker, what is our, accuracy of the stress test if we haven't achieved the target heart rate? And is target heart rate, less for a stress echo than for a TMT?
Actually not. You should use the same target heart rate which you are using for the TMT. And in dobutamine, you can be little lax because you are giving additional inotropic agent. Okay, so even your heart rate falls little below, it is okay because you are also giving an additional inotropic stress because of dobutamine. Now, as you said, kid, for beta blockers, see, when you are doing a diagnostic stress echo, it is better to stop the beta blockers depending on the washout period of that particular beta blocker. So something like a long-acting like bisoprolol or sustained-release metoprolol, we ask them at least to stop for 24 hours. Now, patients who are known coronary artery disease, we don't ask them to stop it because there actually you want to see whether on optimal medical therapy, whether his symptoms are really related to ischemia or not. So that is why we generally don't ask them to remove the beta blockers there. One thing is sure that beta blockers reduce the sensitivity of stress echocardiography, that is for sure. They definitely reduce it. And especially if you're using dobutamine in presence of beta blocker, then what happens is when you start giving atropine, you get a complete autonomic blockade, that you block the vagal system also and you block sympathetic system also because of beta blocker. So what happens is the patient gets fixed at 110, 120. It doesn't go above 120, doesn't fall also below that. So that is quite an interesting situation. So it is better in those cases, you stop the beta blockers at least 24 hours and then try to use atropine to step up. And there is a study which has shown that the prognostic value of the stress goes down when you don't achieve the maximal workload. If you are at sub-maximal workload, you miss a lot of true positives and the prognostic value of the test goes down.
The next question is, Stress echo in presence of heart rate or tachycardia induced left bundle branch block.
Excellent question. Rather, I'll tell you that stress echo is a big winner here, especially the dobutamine stress echo. I'll tell you why. Because most of these patients who get the heart rate induced left bundle branch block, probably the degeneration of the bundle branch is also a forerunner of a cardiomyopathy. Okay, so that is very interesting. So many times what happens is whenever you exercise them, they develop a left bundle branch block, they develop dysynchrony, and they may not achieve a reduction in the LV cavity size. You start feeling that as if the septum is becoming hypokinetic because of dysynchrony. The LV doesn't improve its ejection fraction, the end systolic volume doesn't reduce, it may remain the same or it may slightly dilate, but those all could be related to an underlying subclinical cardiomyopathy which gets unmasked on the left during exercise. So this is a very interesting thing. Actually the dobutamine stress echo has been shown to have a better sensitivity and specificity than even an adenosine stress nuclear test, or both of them have almost equal sensitivity in multiple studies. So you should not do exercise nuclear test. You should not do exercise stress echocardiography. You should either do a dobutamine stress echo or you do adenosine nuclear perfusion test, of which also dobutamine stress echo is very good because of the dobutamine you improve the ionotropy of even the cardiomyopathy. Secondly, whatever dysenergy you get is only in the septum. You never get it in the anterior wall. Now, suppose this is related to a proximal LAD territory, you will get extensive anterior wall motion abnormality. So when there is a left bundle branch block patient, I always tell our fellows only to look at anterior wall and not at the septum. And don't bother even if the heart slightly dilates. So on dobutamine, it works out very well. You get dysenergy only in the septum, no anterior wall involvement. The LV doesn't become very dilated and doesn't get angina. And then I'm particularly sure that this is a non-ischemic rate-related LBBB.
Okay, that's very good. So, which views would you prefer to differentiate the circumflex and RCA territory? How would you differentiate these two when you're doing a stress echo?
It is most of the time is not really possible. So especially in the watershed area of posterior wall. So especially in the lateral wall, especially in the four chamber view, if you get more of a mid to apical lateral wall territory akinesia and you get some tethering of the anterior wall, generally we are sure that this must be circumflex. Now suppose if you get say a inferolateral wall akinesia, but along with that if you get a mid-inferior wall akinesia, then you are particularly sure that this is an RCA territory. So that is why I tell you that look at the distal most perfusion territory of that particular coronary. So for circumflex it is the mid-anterolateral wall. For RCA it is the mid-inferior posterior or mid-inferior wall. So when the mid-inferior wall is not affected, probably it is the circumflex. If it is the mid-anterolateral wall is not affected, then probably we'll call it as an RCA territory. Then especially if you have got a basal inferior septal motion, regional wall motion also to it, then definitely it is RCA territory. Now another word of caution, isolated basal inferior wall or isolated basal inferior septum should not be reported as positive stress echo because many healthy people get regional wall motion abnormality at the basal, isolated basal inferior wall or isolated basal inferior septum because of more fibrosis there. Even that you see on the CNS EMR also. If adjacent segment gets akinetic, like say mid-inferior wall or mid-posterior wall, then you can call or mid-inferior septum. If those get associated akinetic, then you call it as an RCA territory ischemia.
Wonderful, sir. Now there are many questions. Let's see how much we can take in the stipulated time. What is the role of or appropriateness of using stress echo in asymptomatic post-thrombolysis patients before coronary angiogram?
Okay. Actually, it will not be rated very high on appropriate use criteria because many of these patients who are thrombolized, if they have no ST resolution, they will obviously go for a rescue. Those who have got a complete ST resolution, ST comes to the baseline, then there's a deep T inversion. Then many of them go for something like a pharmacoinvasive approach that within 4 to 24 hours, they go for a routine angio and a PCI in most of the tertiary care centers according to the guidelines. But as we know that as we go more to the periphery, then these patients where the STs are completely resolved, Ts are inverted, they are completely asymptomatic, and you don't have immediate facilities for angio in that first 4 to 24 hours, then probably I would use a low dose dobutamine at say 72 to 72 hours to 96 hours to look for systolic thickening in that territory. Actually, we use contrast perfusion in that territory because that gives you the microvasculature status to get an idea about the viability there. And we won't do any provocative ischemia testing. That probably you can keep it at 10 to 15 days post-MI. Then you can do either a regular treadmill stress echo, or you can do a dobutamine stress echo to provoke ischemia in that territory or provoke ischemia in another coronary territory. But as I told you, with the STEMI guidelines, all these things won't come because most of them will go by either the rescue pathway or a pharmacoinvasive pathway. Any questions?
There are two, just unmute. There are two large questions. One is asking about the protocol of dobutamine infusion. And the second question is the protocol or SOP, how do you and when do you use contrast agents while you're doing an exercise stress echo?
Yeah. This is very good because if you are getting interested in using contrast, it will actually help your patients a lot. There is always, so before I tell you this, the protocol, let me tell you that contrast is not expensive. Now the vial may look little costly, like say around 5,000 rupees, but the thing is the new contrast, you can actually use it for almost 10 patients. So if you're doing a stress echo, you can use, say, so suppose if you have got so there are two commercial contrasts available. One comes in 1.5 ml vial and another comes in 5 ml vial. The one which comes in 1.5 ml vial, you can actually opacify the LV as little as 0.1 or 0.2 ml. While the one which comes with 5 ml vial, you can opacify the LV with just 0.5 ml of that contrast with a saline flush. So actually you can use it and distribute that cost over the next 5 patients. So that is hardly anything. If you are using that, is only 1,000 rupees extra. Remember, all our contrast of say cardiac CT or cardiac MRI are much expensive than that. Then the protocol in the dobutamine, what we do is we start with a rest images. We just give a very small aliquot of contrast, flush it, take the resting images. Then we start the dobutamine infusion. We start with 5 mics, 10 mics, 20, 30, 40. Each test is for 3 minutes. So once the second minute is over, then at around 2.5 minutes, we give a small aliquot of just 0.1 ml of contrast and flush it. Then if we are at 20 or something, then we can start giving 1/4 cc of atropine and flush it after that. Then from 2.5 minutes to the third minute of that end, we acquire those images and then we increase the dobutamine for the next stress. So this what they do in West is that they have got a continuous contrast infusion because they can use 1 or 2 vials for one patient. That luxury we can't do. So we have written that particular protocol in our guidelines there. You go to the Journal of Indian Academy of Echocardiography 2017 issue, and then we give those small aliquots at 2.5 minutes in a particular stage, and then followed by a small aliquot of atropine, and then flush and take the image in the last 15 seconds, and then you start the next 3 minutes and you increase the dobutamine to the next dose, like 20 to 30, 30 to 40. When you are doing exercise echo, it is very easy. You use less contrast. At rest, first you give the bolus, you give the bolus followed by saline flush, take the resting images. Then at peak exercise, you tell the patient that you have to warm me at least half a minute before you want to stop. And generally you come to know, looking at the ECG and looking at the patient distress. Then you tell him that in a half minute, I'm going to stop. So the sister gives a 0.2 ml of the Definity or 0.5 ml of the Sonoview, and then flushes it, and then stops the treadmill so that the patient comes and lies on the within 5 seconds he has to come and immediately lie down left lateral. And by the time you start imaging, the contrast is already there in the LV cavity. So you get exquisitely good images at peak exercise. If you have got a cut in your that particular imaging table, when the patient is on left lateral, you can go all the way to the axilla and get beautiful long axis images. Secondly, with the contrast, you can achieve the long axis images of LV very fast. You really don't have to struggle. So remember, first thing you do is that tomorrow morning call up your carpenter, get a nice cutoff of your bed, and day after tomorrow you call up the contrast agent people and get the contrast vials and start doing the stress echoes. And you will start using it for all your ICU patients and all those patients where 2 consecutive territories are not showing a good subendocardium. So remember, whatever kind of a echo or the echo window you have, contrast actually can help you in a lot of patients, making them diagnostic tests, converting a non-diagnostic test to a diagnostic test.
There are a lot of questions actually, but I think I would suggest the delegates to kindly refer to the excellent article he's written as a guidelines of stress echo would answer most of your questions. I'll just pick and choose a few. There is one asking about hypotension during dovitamin infusion. So any significance?
Most of the time it is benign and it doesn't have any prognostic significance. Many times it is something like the way you get neurocardiogenic syncope, that kind of a thing. What you do is just raise the patient's legs and the BP gets corrected. But that is why, as Dr. Singh pointed out, that start using that hand grip, and that helps you a lot. You use the right hand for hand grip. Don't use a grip through which the dovitamin infusion is going, that the left arm. So give him the right arm. Ask him to continue to continue that, so that you will not get that kind of hypotension. The BP rises better, heart rate rises better, and you get a better double pressure product.
So I think I would, the second last question, and then I'll come to the last one. Tardokinesis and how is it appreciated on rest echo and on a stress echo?
See, it is actually on the rest echo, you may slightly overdiagnose it, let me tell you. But on the stress echo, it is quite useful, as I showed you, looking at the half systole. But don't actually do real half systole. What you do is you are going to have an ECG along with your image. What you do is that the right right marker on that ECG, just move it upwards towards the T wave, because it goes from R to R. So the right marker, you start moving it. So always your machine will have that ECG marker to be moved when you are actually running the clip. So just take the right marker all the way to the T wave and then start going up the T wave. Many times just on the upslope of the T wave, and you suddenly start looking at certain regional wall motion abnormalities. Now to appreciate that, so what happens is the image becomes very jerky. So what you do is that you reduce the speed of the display. Okay, so there is always, you'll have one button to reduce the speed of the that cine display. So you reduce it to say 50% or 30% or 40% of the regular speed, so that jerkiness goes, and then you can start seeing the takeoff of all the segments, and you will find that some of them are not taking off while the others are taking off. So this is how you pick up the tardokinesis. This is also, you can cut away the translational motions and the tethering motions also, and also you can pick up the tardokinesia. So just use this particular thing of taking the right cursor up on the T wave and the upslope. If you take it much earlier, you will see much wider areas, and then you start losing the specificity, because you may be picking up some of the myopathic segments also. So I think it is better to keep it on the tip of the T wave or the upslope of the T wave, and then look at the. So I don't call it as half systole, I call it 2/3 of systole.
The last question is from our friend Dr. Vinayak. Can we do Suga index, LV and systolic pressure volume curve routinely for assessment of LV contractility and systolic pressure and systolic volume?
It is very, very cumbersome. If you see all that, now this whole thing is to look at the end systolic pressure volume relationship, for one thing, for LV contractility, and also you can use it with in conjunction with the aorta to look at the elastance of the aorta divided by the elastance of the LV to know the LV aorta coupling. Now, this discoupling or the end systolic pressure volume relationship goes down very early in the HEP-PEPs. This is very, very cumbersome to do. This is done, most of the papers, this is done in a very controlled situation. I think if you are creating a paper or a study, it is good, but for the clinical use, I doubt that it will have any clinical use. I think rather start using those simple other things like looking at E by E prime at peak exercise. So you will see that when you start doing stress echoes and your lab starts becoming popular, you will get a lot of people with dyspnea on exertion. So look at the E by E prime, look at the TR velocity, look at the RV function, and look at the lungs for the comets. Actually, you will pick up a lot of patients the cause of dyspnea, and that is actually the strength of stress echo, because this kind of dynamic imaging is not possible even with stress CMR or with the stress nuclear study. So that is so start using this particular peculiarity of echocardiography, that it can go to the bedside of an exercising person and get you so much of data. So that is what I'm trying to tell you, that the stress nuclear perfusion or stress CMRs have become exquisite in delineating and improved their sensitivity. But the Achilles heel is that they cannot look at the valves, the increase in the mitral regurgitation at peak stress in a dynamic mode, or measure the PA pressures, measure the LV filling pressures by E prime, so on and so forth. So that is why you start using the echoes, and you will be able to have the answer in 80% of your patients, so that you can filter a large group of patients by such a low cost office-based investigation. And then you'll have a handful of them where you can do a higher level of testing with the more modern equipments and more modern modalities. So remember, stress echo is a very, very cheap modality. It is there in everybody's lab because everyone has got a treadmill and everyone has got an echo machine. What you need is two things. You just need to move the treadmill closer to your echo lab or closer to your echo table. And second thing, you should have a will to do it. That's all.
Perfect. I think let me thank Philips for arranging this excellent meeting, and this talk could have not been done, justice without Dr. Nitin. I mean, he is an authority on this. I am thankful to Philips again for giving a good machine, and I think a high-end machine in COVID time is a boon, because your echo time is drastically reduced. So I think that is another benefit in this time.